Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene. July 20th and 21st, 2026. Over those 48 hours, the very heart of New Delhi turned into ground zero for the massive CJP protest. Now, as you probably know, this whole thing didn't just happen overnight. The root cause had been boiling over for weeks with the nationwide NEET exam controversy. Student anger was literally hitting a fever pitch, right? And it was largely galvanized by prominent figures like Sonam Wangchuk and his viral call for a Chalo Sansad, a march straight to Parliament. In this explainer, we're looking at the absolute climax of these events through the lens of a raw, unedited broadcast recorded by the Hindustan Times at Jantar Mantar. It captures this incredibly intense, highly charged interview with politician Dimple Yadav. It's essentially a real-time window into a protest that, well, it shook the capital and totally dominated the national conversation. Today will be celebrated as a black day for democracy and history. I mean, wow, you can just feel the sheer emotional and political weight there. Dimple Yadav dropped this explosive quote mere moments after the physical confrontation between the students and the Delhi police. To really grasp the gravity of that reaction, we have to look at what was happening just off camera before the broadcast began. You had thousands of students answering that Chalo Sansad call, but they were met with massive, heavily fortified security preparations by the authorities. When the march actually tried to push through those barricades, the situation escalated incredibly fast into a chaotic clash. And that chaos is exactly what prompted this quote, setting the tone for the entire fallout.
Let's move to Section 1 and see how this builds. Anatomy of an allegation. Claims of brutality.
So, on the ground at Jantar Mantar, the narrative essentially splits into two completely different realities. On one hand, you have the student groups maintaining that they traveled from all over the country for a strictly peaceful assembly. They just wanted to make their voices heard about the NEET exams. But on the flip side, the official police accounts painted a drastically different picture. Authorities cited massive crowd control challenges, stating protesters were aggressively trying to breach established security perimeters. Understanding this baseline, the students asserting it was a peaceful gathering versus the police's mandate to maintain order amidst a massive, unpredictable crowd, that's absolutely crucial for understanding the clash that defined these 48 hours. The interview we're breaking down here itemizes some incredibly severe allegations from the ground. We're talking claims that students were heavily beaten with batons or lathis and hit with tear gas. The broadcast even includes specific, shocking allegations of electric shocks and accusations that male officers were tearing the clothes of female students. It's heavy stuff. But to view this chronologically and objectively, we have to factor in the immediate official pushback. Delhi police and government officials firmly denied the use of electric shocks. They defended the lathi charge and tear gas as standard, necessary crowd dispersal tactics once the barricades were broken. And while they did confirm mass detentions, officials stated they were just a necessary measure to restore public order, entirely disputing the one-sided narrative of unprovoked brutality. Now, listen to how the rhetoric escalates in the immediate aftermath by describing the events as a direct strike on the chest of Mother India. Dimple Yadav translates the physical allegations, specifically the claim of students being hit on the chest instead of the legs, into a deeply passionate nationalistic metaphor. The physical clash was instantly transformed into a symbol of national betrayal. And this specific framing, it didn't just stay on camera, it caught fire online. Quotes exactly like this fueled massive social media amplification of the movement. The imagery of unarmed youth being equated with an attack on the motherland spread like wildfire, acting as the main catalyst that propelled a local Jantar Mantar incident into nationwide Day 2 solidarity protests. Moving right along to Section 2, the plainclothes nuance. Now, what's really interesting about the slide is a highly specific detail regarding how law enforcement was behaving at the scene. The broadcast highlights a stark contrast. On one side, it suggests uniformed police were just maintaining their duty, some looking ashamed, and some even actively cooperating or sympathizing with protesters. But then, there's the allegation that plainclothes individuals removed their badges, acted like violent goons, and actually committed the alleged violence. This maps directly onto the wider Vijita Dahaya controversy that totally gripped the news cycle during the protests. Having unidentified plainclothes personnel operating among the uniformed officers created massive confusion. It led to these heated, unresolved disputes over whether these individuals were legitimate officers doing covert crowd control or unauthorized agitators sent in to escalate the violence. All right. Section 3, political framing and demands. This is where the narrative shifts from the physical allegations on the ground to the political battle lines being drawn. The fallout from the clash rapidly evolved beyond the streets and straight into the halls of government. Dimple Yadav frames the government's response not just as a crowd control issue, but as a fundamental ideological clash, the Constitution versus RSS ideology. This is huge because it shows how the NEET controversy was elevated from just an education issue into a full-blown national constitutional debate. It wasn't just about exam reform anymore. It became this massive focal point for broader student politics, sparking intense debates inside and outside Parliament about the government's whole approach to student rights and democratic oversight. So the crucial point is that this ideological framing led directly to some explicit political ultimatums. The leaders and politicians backing the CJP movement weren't holding back. They demanded the removal of the Pradhan, the prime minister, and the education minister, demanding ultimate accountability for the alleged treatment of the students. In response, the government's reaction was highly structured. Sure, there were some initial attempts at negotiations with CJP leaders, but the sweeping nature of these demands led to a swift political standoff. The government maintained its stance on restoring order and conducting official inquiries into the NEET issue, but they flatly, absolutely refused to concede to the calls for high-level resignations. And that standoff brings us to this characterization of the administration as an arrogant, merciless, and harsh government. This quote really summarizes how the speaker characterizes the current administration's historical legacy based on these specific protests. But more than that, it became the rallying cry that defined the second day of the protests. Broadcasted widely, this sentiment mobilized further action. It wasn't just Delhi anymore. This exact description served as the catalyst for day 2, sparking nationwide solidarity demonstrations across university campuses and major cities. Students miles and miles away from Jantar Mantar mobilized under this exact sentiment, vastly expanding the footprint and urgency of the CJP movement. Bringing us to the final phase of our explainer, Section 4, the March to Parliament. And this brilliantly illustrates the immediate trajectory of the protest as declared in the interview. It's the actual physical timeline and tactical climax of this 48-hour movement. Step 1, the massive mobilization and peaceful gathering at Jantar Mantar. Step 2, the highly publicized, tense march toward Parliament or Sansad to raise their voices, which, of course, is what directly triggered the heavy police barricades and the confrontation. And finally, Step 3, returning to Jantar Mantar afterward to regroup, assess the detentions, and plan their continued civil disobedience. It provides a really clear chronological map of how the physical protests surged and receded over those 2 days, showing us a very active, escalating movement. Which leaves us with this final, overarching thought. When allegations of state brutality meet the fundamental right to demonstrate, what happens to the future of democratic protest? These 48 hours of the CJP protest in July 2026 absolutely proved to be a defining moment in India's modern student movement. The clash didn't just end at the barricades. These 2 days left lasting questions for the country's education system, especially regarding that unresolved NEET controversy, and set a completely new precedent for how democratic protests are managed, amplified on social media, and debated. How a society balances these massive student movements with state security will ultimately shape the future of democratic expression itself. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these events, and I'll see you on the next explainer.